Welcome to 1 Week, 1 Year, a podcast where we watch and discuss a year of film history every episode, starting from 1895, the dawn of cinema. And this week, we're talking about 1926, late silent era. I'm one of your hosts, Chris Ellie. I am a film projectionist, and joining me as always is...
I'm Glenn Covell. I am a filmmaker.
And just so everybody knows, on top of the show here, if you are watching on YouTube, if you prefer to listen, you can hear us on your favorite podcast app. And if you are listening on a podcast app, at least for the next episode or two, we don't really know what we're going to do once we catch up with copyright. But you can watch us on YouTube and see the films while we talk about them. So get it in while you can, while it's still hot.
Yeah, we have this episode and next episode, and after that, we have nothing to fall back on.
Yeah. Maybe we'll make a Patreon exclusive, non-existent Patreon exclusive version with the film clips in them. But that sounds like some extra work. Yeah, it's been about 2 months since we recorded. I was dealing with a bunch of film festivals one after the other, and also had to move, but we're back, and yeah, that's what's been going on with me: film festivals and moving. What's going on with you, Glenn?
Employment things, I don't know, it's gonna be weird to listen back to at a later point because I hopefully will not be unemployed forever, but yeah, not working right now, but keeping my nose to the grindstone. Is that what people say? I don't know. Looking for more film and TV work to jump onto. And
if anyone's got a job for Glenn,
there you go. If you listen to this podcast and you work on a film or TV thing, let me know. And I have been planning very, very early stages. At some point this summer, I want to shoot a silent picture of my own. Which I've done before, but I'd like to sort of take, I think, some of the stuff I've learned watching all these and kind of apply it to a small, short thing.
Two-reeler.
Yeah. Well, even a two-reeler, that's like 20 minutes. I'm like, too much work. Let me do a one-reeler. But I am thinking about it in that like structure of, so a lot of two-reelers have the kind of like first half, second half, which weirdly kind of even applies for a lot of the features now. Like they have a sort of like first half, second half structure to them.
That's what they're used to.
Yeah.
Well, let's hold that thought of the silent comedians making feature films, so that we can talk about the news from 1926. Give ourselves a little bit of that sweet context. So, Glenn, why don't you take it away?
Context.
The news of the year, 1926. General strike in the United Kingdom. Martial law were declared. The National Bar Association is incorporated in the USA. Gertrude Edel is the first woman to swim the English Channel. Weimar Republic joins the League of Nations. Hurricane devastates Miami. The Northside Gang blasts Al Capone's crime headquarters with machine gun fire. Capone escapes unharmed. Famed magician Harry Houdini dies. The man can withstand any punch by preparing his muscles to block it, but after a sneak attack, he succumbs to organ damage. Winnie the Pooh is published in England. Route 66 is established in the United States. Don Juan is the first feature film to feature the Vitaphone sound-on-disc technology. Cinema's favorite Latin lover, Rudolph Valentino, suddenly dies a young death. 100,000 attend the star's funeral.
Well, little movie news at the end there.
We always got to wrap it up with the movie news.
I think it's kind of funny that we mentioned both of those specifically. They are both notable, but we have not watched any Rudolph Valentino's movies.
Yep.
And also, we didn't watch Don Juan for this episode because it didn't seem that interesting other than its one like technological advancement.
It's got a canonical soundtrack, as opposed to some of these movies which have a semi-canonical soundtrack.
Right. It had a synchronized soundtrack, but it did not have any synchronized dialogue.
Right. And sound effects, I believe. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Which is weird. Like, you can record a voice. Why not just do it? I guess they'll find out
trouble.
soon.
Too much trouble. Yeah. I mean, they're doing it, right? They're doing it at this time. They're just not doing it in features yet. It's like there's all those shorts of talking about Casey at bat or whatever.
What a wonderful poem, Casey at the bat. we now we have completely missed our opportunity to talk about Rudolph Valentino at all because he's dead from this point on.
But yeah, he was a huge deal in like the mid-20s.
Yeah. But we'll go back and revisit some of this stuff later.
Yeah.
And we'll bring you along with us, listeners.
There you go. Bonus episode.
So anyway,
the Valentino years.
Yeah, we'll do a blank check for Rudolph Valentino. Let's start off with our one short film in our segment 1 Week 1 Reel.
Yeah, the one short that we have to talk about today is Ménilmontant.
Nice.
Which is, as it sounds, a French film.
Yeah, and this. Where do we start with this? This movie is phenomenal.
Yes.
It's amazing.
I was very struck by this film. I didn't really know what to expect. I only knew about it because it was highly rated on Letterboxd. And it seemed like it was different from a lot of the other stuff that we had watched up to this point. And yeah, I don't want to get ahead of myself. This might be my favorite thing that we watched.
Yeah.
For 1996.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
it's very good. It's a French film, but made by a Russian-born filmmaker, Dmitry Kirnosov.
Mm-hmm.
I believe I'm saying that correctly. And yeah, it feels like it's like the confluence of like all the kind of recent advancements in like storytelling. Like this feels incredibly modern in terms of its like cinematography and its editing and its storytelling.
Honestly, it feels more than modern. When I was watching Ménilmontant, I was thinking movies these days would never do something this adventurous,
Unless it's a animated Spider-Man movie.
Right. It is doing things with the camera, with the editing that are so evocative of mood and feeling and just like getting a sense of a scene through kind of artful, formal editing. It's the kind of thing that you don't even see in movies. Like movies, or nowadays, like movies are such a machine as far as like how they're edited, and like really stylistic flourishes like this, I feel like don't even exist anymore. It's better than movies now.
Damn, hot take. I think you can see this stuff, but yeah, it's definitely not super mainstream. I guess the plot of this movie is like not the most notable thing about it. I feel like it's sort of a mix of a lot of kind of 1910s, 1920s storytelling things of like poverty and murder and love triangles and that sort of thing.
I mean, yeah, I think this handles it in a much more mature way.
Well, yeah, for sure. Stuff, though. Right. It's like on paper, it's like, oh yeah, this is what a lot of dramas from this time period about. But the way that it's executed is so much more simultaneously like more subtle, and also I feel like the like really dramatic bits are incredibly striking and dramatic. I mean, this movie opens with an axe murder.
Yeah.
And it is upsetting.
Yeah. And that axe murder, the way that it is depicted is so good. It's like so it's got all this quick cutting, like this almost like Psycho style, like stabbing like past the camera to kind of, not show all of the gore, but like to get the feeling across. And the main thing, what a splash at the beginning of this movie. And the main thing that it serves, it's not even like the main thing that the movie's about, which I was kind of surprised about. The main thing it serves is just to kind of like establish this kind of emotional context for the two main characters.
Yeah, it is funny that the axe murder is like kind of incidental to the rest of the movie. Like it's sort of setting up the rest of it, but it's like the movie's not actually about this like horrific murder that it opens with. It's about two sisters who survive the ex murderer. Their parents are killed, and yeah, the whole movie's like very ominous, very kind of nightmarish and surreal. I feel like, even if its visuals aren't necessarily that out there, just it creates this really kind of intense tone through the whole.
Yeah, there's a lot of like brooding in this movie, and like the brooding is emphasized by the editing. One thing that I wanted to mention about the murder at the beginning before we hop into the main story also is that it was doing something really wild, which it seemed to be like, as the murder was happening, cross-cutting between the present and the future. So it was showing the murder happening and then showing the people like finding the body later, and like back and forth, which is wild. Like, it's really interesting.
There's a lot of like playing around with time and space in the edits in this, which is a thing that feels really kind of experimental and adventurous for when this was made.
And it feels really cohesive. It works really well.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of kind of Soviet style Eisenstein or Ziga Vertov-esque edits going on, but it feels so... I think especially with the Ziga Vertov stuff that we've seen, that just feels experimental for the sake of experimentation, of just sort of like, I don't know, does this work? Which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's like, I feel like in this, it's really being used for like a clear narrative purpose.
Yes.
Which makes it stand out for sure.
Which I think it brings this kind of like practical usage to the kind of formless experimentation, shapeless experimentation that Vertov did in Kino Eye. I think of this movie as like fulfilling on... It's like Kino Eye asks a question of what the cinematic lens can be, and this movie is coming up with an answer in light of all of the kind of experimentation that Vertov did.
Yeah.
I think this and what we could talk about next, A Page of Madness, are both very post Kino Eye in that way.
Yeah. For all of its sort of like formal experimentation stuff, which is all really impressive, the thing that really makes this one stick out to me the most is because it got a really kind of genuine emotional reaction out of me also.
Yeah.
Like, I teared up watching this movie, which hasn't happened that many times on like watching stuff for the podcast. There's a really incredible scene where one of the two sisters, and the title Ménilmontant is referring to a neighborhood in Paris where the majority of the movie takes place. And there's a scene where one of the sisters is sitting on a park bench next to an old man eating a salami and some bread. And there's no intertitles in this, I don't think. I don't think there's any at all. So there's no words over it. It's just focusing on her face. It's just letting us sit with her, right? She's going hungry because she's living in poverty, and the old man gives her some bread. And she's
her acting is incredible.
And she's crying while eating this bread. And I was just like, it's just holding on her face. And it was really moving.
Yeah, it's like this really touching moment of kindness in a movie that has a lot of misery in it. Or ennui is maybe like ennui that leads to misery.
Yeah.
The kind of bare bones plot of this movie, after the murder, the two sisters move into Paris, into the city. There's a lot of like really fantastic shots of like city life, and it's like the hustle and bustle. It's so exciting, you know. And the kind of main sister that we follow meets this guy. They start, you know, kind of going out. They eventually come to the situation where the guy is kind of like pressuring her into sex, and she's like she's not ready, I guess. She's not like super, she's she likes him, but she doesn't want to. And he kind of just pressures her until she does. And or she concedes, I suppose. And this, I think, is pretty unique in that most movies about this kind of situation of this time, it is like an out and out like rape, basically. Where this is presenting something like a little more pedestrian, a little more like nuanced. Not that there's anything not wrong about it, but like it's nuanced in terms of its approach, because she does like him but doesn't want this. And so after they have sex, she spends like 10 minutes in the movie just kind of wandering around the city in this kind of like weird, confused ennui about what is happening or what had just happened to her. And it's so emotionally like nuanced and complex. It's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like a big takeaway from this movie is like, I, along with probably most people, have this sort of like ingrained idea of like what silent movies are, and it's basically Charlie Chaplin movies. And this is like so far, and even like amongst Charlie Chaplin movies, like A Woman of Paris is like not like that at all.
Yeah.
Any movies about Paris from the 20s, man, they're wild. Even something like that is something that I think kind of thematically, even if it's touched upon in other things of other movies like this, it's usually not handled with the degree of nuance that this sort of approaches it with. She sees, after this, ennui stuff, there's a scene where the younger sister sees the man that she's with, this Conrad Veidt looking dude. It's not Conrad Veidt, but he has a similar kind of like sharp-faced man look to him,
but a little more French.
Yeah, exactly.
It's got a French vibe.
But so he sees this guy with she like follows him and sees her with her older sister, and discovers that he's two-timing her. And there's this sort of jump cut edits into her face, and it's the way that it's framed and the way that it's edited is like the same. It's kind of mirroring the scene where like she discovers that her parents have been murdered. Which is just a great use of like film language to be like, oh, this is like taking the emotion of one thing and kind of applying it onto another scene just through sort of like the way it's shot and edited, which is great.
Yeah, that's cool. I didn't notice that. There's so much, like, this is like the most kind of emotionally complex and rich movie that I feel like we've seen so far.
And I think I think it's interesting, like, reading like plot synopses of it too, because like there's things in it that I think are genuinely kind of meant to be read more than one way. Like there's a scene where the older sister is having this kind of weird dream and is looking at the empty side of her bed, and at first it kind of seems like she's worrying about her younger sister because like they grew up together, and she's looking at this empty side of the bed, and like, this is all done purely just through visual, so it's like you can't really tell what she's thinking about. But then given what happens later in the movie, it could just as easily be her thinking about the man they're both sleeping with. Like, I don't know, just that too, of sort of like having some ambiguity and having things that mean multiple things is also like not super common, I guess, in a lot of stuff that maybe that's not true, but I don't know, that for whatever reason that scene stuck out to me also.
Yeah, backing up to like real quick, I gotta mention that like we've kind of had sex scenes in movies before, but like they are usually they're usually rape scenes, honestly. Which is
an unfortunate amount of them are. Yeah.
And they're never, I guess they're never shot to be sexy. They're shot to be scary.
Hmm.
And though this is not something that she was into, reaching into that like emotional complexity. This is almost like the first proper sex scene that we've seen in a movie. It's got this like superimposition of like rushing cars going by, like on top of like footage of kind of ambiguous nudity behind like all of this imagery. And like it's very like evocative in a fairly like artistic way. So I just thought I should shout that out.
Yeah.
The way this movie wraps up is what?
Just the way this movie wraps up is, it's not really funny. I don't know why I'm laughing at it, but
no. So the guy like basically ditches her after this encounter, and she ends up getting pregnant and is kind of like rejected by many people.
Yeah, she's like shunned by all of society, seemingly.
Yeah,
which I think that we've seen in other movies too, where like pregnant women are treated as like vermin, and they're like forced to like live on the street and like give up their babies at a church or something like that's been in like at least 3 other things we've watched, I feel like.
Right. So yeah, she ends up on the street with a baby, and she later, as she, there's this moment that you were talking about earlier with her kind of being hungry, and this like really nice old man kind of sitting on the bench eating salami, and then hands some salami to her. It's so touching.
Yeah.
And eventually she runs into her sister again. Her sister almost like doesn't even recognize her. Her sister's with that guy at this point, and she is kind of living a kind of fabulous flapper lifestyle. She's wearing really nice clothes, and so the main sister, who we're mainly following, kind of approaches the other one, and you kind of think that it's going to be going for this sort of love triangle thing of the two of them like fighting it out over this guy, like I want to get this guy back or something. But really it's like this kind of moment of like understanding and tenderness between the two of them, where the sisters start kind of helping each other out in like raising the baby. Yes. And then at the same time, there's this other thread that develops of the guy is seeing yet another woman in the chain, and then there's another guy who that woman was with, who is now trying to get revenge on the sucky guy from earlier, and you don't even see much context of who these people are. You just know that they were similarly jilted by this scumbag, and then they kill him.
They smash his head in, which is also kind of like, that's like at the very end. Then it is again kind of like mirroring the beginning, like the opening murder scene. Good stuff.
Yeah. A movie about wandering around in various states of misfortune, bookended by murder.
Yeah. But I was kind of blown away by this. I thought it was really, really good.
Yeah.
And I'd never heard of it before. Like when we recorded the last episode, I never heard of it.
Yeah. This is one that Jack Vernick, who we had on for the Irma episode, has been hyping up to me for
really?
months. Yeah, this is one of his favorite movies. Mine too. I thought it was great.
Yeah, It feels like one of those sort of like real, when you get real deep into like silent movies, you find this one. It's like, oh no, this one doesn't get talked about maybe as much as it ought to, but it's very good.
So we can move on to our feature presentation now that we're done with that.
And now we're pleased to bring you our feature presentation.
Why don't we start off with Page of Madness, which is another movie in the kind of post-Kino eye, impressionistic editing sort of realm.
Yeah. I'm curious about, so this is a Japanese movie. I'm curious how much, because this has a similar kind of editing style, or like, you know, it like you said, it feels post Kino eye, post sort of Eisenstein. And I'm curious, how accessible were films across countries?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen a lot of like French movies playing in America and that kind of thing. We're going to be talking about The General later, and that movie for some reason premiered in Tokyo.
Yeah.
But so maybe the director didn't said that he hadn't seen a lot of other movies or other countries' movies before he made this movie. But he said later on that a movie that he'd watched and found influential was The Last Laugh.
I can definitely see that, because I wrote that down. Like, there's a lot of Last Laugh stuff in this, or it feels kind of influenced by that.
I think like maybe this was, if there wasn't any direct like cross-pollination with Russian movies, then this was probably someone taking what Murnau did in Last Laugh and extrapolating it out in a direction that happens to end up being somewhat similar to a Russian sensibility.
Yeah, it feels kind of like it's kind of similar to Ménilmontant. Like, it's using every trick in the book that's been like done up until this point. Especially this, I think this one even more so, in terms of like, there's a lot of camera movement. There's a lot of like Dutch angles, montage, double exposure, funhouse mirrors.
Yeah, a lot of like turning kind of regular imagery into stuff that's like bizarre and abstract. And
I think kind of similarly to Ménilmontant, has this kind of like ominous, like nightmarish quality to it. Like, it's a bit surreal and a bit just, it's
this
not even that
a bit surreal.
Not even that it's spooky, but it's just this like this like dread it is sort of infused into it.
Yeah. I mean, I think that like, you know, what Ménilmontant is I feel like its main feeling is ennui, where this one is like tension and then like panic.
Yeah. I mean, it's called The Page of Madness, and it takes place in an asylum. So it's apt. There's a lot of, I mean, and sort of, it is really using the kind of the breakdown of sanity to sort of, not necessarily justify its like visual language, but it's like using a lot of that kind of subjective impressionistic stuff to portray this like detachment from reality, and sort of it's got real kind of like Shutter Island, Jacob's Ladder vibes,
right? Yeah,
right. Of sort of like
for sure
the descent into madness.
I mean, it's doing a similar thing to Caligari in that it is using it's using the featured mad people of the story to emphasize a kind of less literal, more impressionistic filmic landscape. Caligari, through, I don't know, kind of strange story turns and painted backdrops that are very kind of strange and impressionistic, where this like is using like camera techniques to accomplish all of that. One thing that, like, in addition to just all of the kind of superimpositions and weird like animation almost and like other stuff going on in this movie, was that I noticed, and I don't know if this is due to the degradation of the film print or if it was intentional, but this like really highly saturated, really grainy look to it. And it almost felt like everything, like the grays were pushed closer to white or black in this movie. And it felt like this really like heightened chiaroscuro reality.
I mean, I think that this definitely does have a lot of like pretty stark high contrast lighting in it. I think that is exaggerated even further by the fact that, I think whatever version of this movie is like available to watch for free online is pretty degraded. Isn't like the best scan or the best print of it. And so I think it is a bit like watching like Alien on VHS or whatever, where it's like you lose a lot of the detail, but you get this like really kind of stark visual style.
There's HD versions of it available, but even the HD stuff kind of looks like it was scanned off of like 16 millimeter or something like that.
Yeah. And I think that might be the only version of it that exists, because I mean, this was considered a lost movie until I think the 70s. Yeah, 1971, it was rediscovered.
The director found it in his garden shed.
Which is crazy. It's crazy how often that story happens, where it's like, oh yeah, here it is. It was under the floorboards the whole time.
That kind of stuff, like always. One time I bought a film reel off of eBay, and I bought it mainly for the reel itself. It was a Goldberg Brothers like steel film reel, which they're really solid. They've been making them for 100 years. And I needed a few for projectionist reasons. And like to buy a new one's about $100, but you can sometimes find them just on eBay that people sell for decoration and that kind of thing. And I bought a few that way, but one of them came with some film on it, and it was this like really, really degraded film. It had water damage. It was all kind of fused together. It was all brown and flaky. And so I removed the film in kind of as non-destructive a way as I could, because I thought maybe there was some of it that I could salvage. But like it kind of just like fell apart and turned to dust in my hands.
Holy shit.
And I always just like I still have like a good chunk of it around, but it's all just like this stuck together. Like it smells of vinegar very badly. And it's like you can barely make out, it seems to be a cartoon, but you can barely make out what images are on it. And
it's London after midnight.
That's like what I've always wondered is like, is it like, could that have been something that's lost, because all those stories are like that, are like you found something that was gone just randomly. Although it did smell like vinegar, which means that it is celluloid acetate and not celluloid nitrate, so it wouldn't be anything from before the 50s.
See,
so maybe that actually soothes my worries a bit more.
I also just like that you're projector savvy enough to like, I know what kind of film it is because of the smell. Which even isn't like, I guess if you've handled either of those two types of film, it's like it's pretty clear which one smells like which.
Or at least as they're degrading, which one smells like which.
That is a thing I think if you've never handled motion picture film, is that it has a very distinct smell, which I never knew until I started doing stuff with film.
You're probably, I mean, since you're doing stuff by shooting on film, I wonder if you're smelling more like chemicals than I am.
Maybe.
As a projectionist.
I mean, usually when you open up a roll of 16 millimeter, it usually has it's got a bit of a smell to it. It's one of those things where it's not a pleasant smell, but I do kind of like it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's
Anyway, Page of Madness. Good movie.
Page of Madness. Yeah.
So the rough overview, this movie is not a super plotty movie, because like it's a lot of scenes.
It's a vibey movie.
It's a lot of scenes that also like end in dead ends, because it's a lot of things that might be real or might be imagined, or sort of like are real part of the time, and then it like loops back on itself and you see what really happened. Like there's a lot of that kind of stuff in this. But it's the main overview of it is it's about a janitor who works at an asylum in the country, whose wife is an inmate, patient. Asylums are weird in that I'm not sure if they're more prison or more hospital. In the 20s in Japan,
Wow.
I guess we're leaning more towards the prison side of things. But
a lot of movies about asking that question.
This janitor is working at the asylum and is sort of losing his own grip on reality, and is also worried that his daughter that he had with his wife is also like losing her grip on reality, or that bad things are going to happen to her. There's a lot of scenes that sort of like begin one way that then are revealed to be sort of imaginary, or sort of revealed to be not really what is happening.
Mm-hmm.
There's I like the opening scene is this like dance scene with all this like, you know, fancy set design and stuff, and then that is revealed to be a woman dancing alone in like this padded cell, basically. Very much the sucker punch of its day. Got to make that joke whenever possible when a modern thing is like an old thing. Again, no intertitles, so a lot of like giving you an impression of a scene and kind of letting the audience interpret it a bit more. I think this movie, like Ménilmontant, is a little bit less concerned about like cut and dry storytelling, and is more about, yeah, like you said, vibes and sort of creating an overall sort of feeling, and it being, yeah, a lot less literal. I think this even more so, because this is very much about sort of like what is real, what is in someone's head, like, so it's taking that even further.
Yeah, I think that this movie, like, I recognize that it's trying to do something different from Ménilmontant or Last Laugh, for example, as another movie that doesn't use intertitles, more or less. But I think that even though this movie is going for something less plotty, I think it has less of a grasp on how to keep the viewer like abreast of what is actually happening in front of them. Even in like it's subverting things, it's revealing that things are delusions, but like I think it's harder to follow, even though like even outside of all of that stuff. I feel like I needed a bit of a plot summary to tell me the actual reality of like what was even in the movie.
I definitely did too. Yeah, I had to like at the end look up like what was the plot of this, because it's I think there's a bit of our sort of like modern disconnect with like the storytelling of silent movies, and so sometimes they are harder to follow for that reason. But I think this especially because it has so many kind of like weird cul-de-sac scenes of like there's a whole like riot that happens in the asylum, and it's the sort of thing like did that really happen in the sort of like reality of the movie? This is getting into a whole question also that I kind of have a problem with, like, what really happened? Like, none of it happened. It's a movie. It's all made up. And so once you start applying that question to something, it becomes like, all right, well, this entire thing is impressionistic then.
Yeah. Which I think saves the movie in many ways. Like it does like it saves the movie from its kind of difficulty that you would have to grasp onto what's happening.
Yeah.
Because it is emphasizing the dread, it's emphasizing the insanity, it is making you feel like the tension of just existing as someone who has lost their mind.
Yeah.
This was made by a group of artists called Shinkan Kakuwa. Oh man, what was the translation?
It roughly translates to new impressions or new perceptions. I think new perceptions is kind of usually how it's translated into English. Which was like a literary movement in Japan in the 1920s. I have a quote by one of the guys who is in this sort of like art movement, Rishi Yokomitsu.
Yeah.
And the quote is, "The phenomenon of perception for Shinkangakuwa Sure, we'll go with that. Is, to put it briefly, the direct, intuitive sensation of a subjectivity that peels away the naturalized exterior aspects and leaps into the thing itself.
I think that's a really good key into understanding what this movie's going for.
Yeah, that kind of unlocks what this whole movie is, because this movie is that. Like, that's what its entire goal is.
It's giving you a direct, intuitive sensation of a subjective experience.
Yeah, of this one guy's, right, this one character's experience of, like, he has lost sight of what is real and what is not, because he's kind of surrounded by people who are delusional, and so he is then becoming delusional himself.
Yeah. And, like, I think that this is a movie that, relative to a lot of other stuff that we've seen, like, really brings you inside of the reality of the character. Especially someone who, you know, is losing their grip on reality. Like, a lot of the time you'll see that happening to somebody, but, like, in this movie you feel it happening.
Yeah.
Through filmmaking. You know, it's a show don't tell kind of thing.
Yeah. Which, I mean, a lot of these silent movies are pretty showy because they can't tell a lot of things, but this is definitely
intertitles.
It is very much like we're seeing that transition right away from the kind of stagey, locked off, like, wide camera stuff, into a much more subjective type of filmmaking. It's cool to see, like, the different kind of stabs at it, of, like, how Murnau is doing stuff, and we'll talk about him more in a bit, and, like, the Soviet things, and just, like, and the fact that none of these are really none of these have sort of, like, combined necessarily into, like, a centralized, accepted film language the way that I think stuff is kind of now. And so it's interesting to see different people try, like, wildly different things that are all now kind of we kind of take it for granted, of, like, oh yeah, subjective editing or subjective cinematography and whatever, moving cameras. And it's cool to see each of these different people sort of, like, find new approaches and, like, combine these different things. It's exciting to kind of watch it happen, like, year by year. Yeah.
I mean, I think, you know, you're talking about it like a formalized film language, although I feel like that is the kind of thing that was happening over the course of the 1910s. Was that, like, the 1910s was everybody kind of, and, you know, it's not perfect, it's not fully modern, but, like, I think up until 1910s, there weren't many rules as to how you made a movie. In the 1910s, they were discovering how making a feature film, like, fits, how it works. And by the end of the 1910s, I think that they had come up with a bit of a kind of, for the time, standard Hollywood cinematic language. And in the 1920s, they got into this period of, like, re-experimenting. Okay, we've got this, like, foundation of how to make a feature film. Now let's make it weird again and find new cinematic techniques. Kino eye, montage, etc.
Yeah.
This movie and Last Laugh and Caligari and all of this stuff is, like, is a reflection of that.
Yeah. Another thing with this, because this movie has so much kind of, like, layers of reality to it, there's a lot of dance in it and a lot of mask symbolism, which I was like, yes, the masks. What is the mask and what is the face?
The masks that we all wear.
Indeed. But I don't know, I liked how it's, like, it is giving you kind of, like, symbolism throughout it, of that, like, like, a dance is a kind of an expressionistic thing. I don't know. I thought it was cool that there's dances and masks in this movie.
Yeah, and it is, like, it's a super vibey movie. Like, it felt like the kind of thing, more like the kind of thing that you see on a wall in a museum than the kind of thing that you would see in a theater. As far as just, like, it's a bunch of abstract imagery that is getting a vibe across, and more or less about, like, a story being told.
Yeah.
And So I think that like this movie, it drags a little bit. It like can't keep up that tension at all times. So I think it works pretty well for the first like 40 minutes, and then it kind of starts. It like dips a little bit, and then like finds itself again toward the end.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, I think for like holding that sense of tension for 40 minutes is certainly commendable.
Yeah. How to transition? What else was experimental?
Well, you mentioned Faust, or
True.
you mentioned Murnau.
So we might as well talk about him now.
We might as well talk about Murnau.
Yeah. This is a pretty wild movie.
Yeah.
Faust.
Yeah. We've seen so many Faust stories, but this one is definitely the most detailed.
This is kind of the like canonical Faust movie, I think, too. Like this one is kind of considered like the, I don't know if anyone has directly adapted Faust since, really, but
that they must have.
I mean, I don't know if like in this, I don't know. It's something to look up. But this is Murnau's last German film. After this, he moves to Hollywood. And what a German movie this is, because it's a German folktale, as stated in the opening titles.
And it's Faust.
Yeah, it's the Faust story. You know Faust.
Although I will say, like, everybody knows Faust. And I'm sorry if I hurt your feelings if you don't know Faust, but it is there are elements of the story that I was not aware of that I became aware of because of watching this.
Yeah, it is. So Faust was a real guy who lived in the like 15th, 16th century, like late 15th century, who was an alchemist, a scientist, back when all those things were the same, like a doctor, an alchemist, a wizard, like
a barber. Yeah.
Allegedly he died in an alchemical explosion, which is great.
Rad.
Like he was like mixing together some chemicals and he blew up. I mean, not good for him, but what a way to go out.
Good for history.
The sort of legend that this is based on and that the name is associated with has been around since at least the 16th century, and is kind of the quintessential like be careful what you wish for story or fable.
Monkey paw kind of thing.
Right. I believe it predates the monkey paw.
Probably.
But it is like that. It is like the archetypical like man wants thing is approached by mysterious benefactor who grants his wish, and then he's like, oh no, this was terrible. Why did I wish for this?
Mysterious benefactor being Satan.
Yeah.
I mean, you could say if you're talking about this sort of like legendary, parables in our society, that like you could go back to Icarus.
Right. Yeah.
Like Faust is in a way a descendant of the Icarus story.
Yeah. Very true. This movie is primarily based on the 1832 play. But it takes from kind of a bunch of different sources, but that's sort of its main source material is the play version, which I think with a lot of silent movies is kind of, there was that progression, right? Where even stuff adapted from novels would often take a lot of stuff from whatever the stage version was. Like Frankenstein did that, Jekyll and Hyde did that.
A Trip to the Moon's based on a play.
There you go. This movie looks amazing.
Yeah. A lot of really, really cool imagery.
A lot of really cool imagery. A lot of miniatures. A lot of effects. This is like a really like expensive looking movie.
I'm always like so pleased when we get a movie like this, and it like feels like it harkens back to the like effects driven devil fun times.
This movie,
of Méliès.
more than like anything else we've watched, this is like very. Who knows if I imagine Murnau had seen some Méliès stuff, so he might.
He must have. Yeah.
But this feels like almost the most direct kind of like descendant of those movies.
Yeah.
Where it's like, look at all this crazy shit. Also, the devil's here, and it's like, turning stuff into other stuff.
The devil like kept doing, like doing these kind of like mean things, and I was like, why is the devil being so mean? Why?
I was devil being so mean.
Why is he such a scoundrel?
Yeah. Oh, he's a scoundrel, all right.
Yeah.
So like the movie opens with an intertitle that says "Behold!" exclamation point, and we see the horsemen of the apocalypse flying through the sky.
So
and
cool.
I'm not even entirely sure. I'm pretty sure that's a miniature shot with like smoke being like blown at it, but it's these like demonic horsemen flying steeds through the clouds.
Yeah.
It rules.
This movie starts off with some really big, really cool effects.
Yeah, there is an amazing shot in this of Mephisto, as he's referred to, sort of like looming over a city. And so the city is a miniature, and there's this guy with these massive
like bat wings.
Bat, but they have feathers, so they're like crow wings almost. And he's just like looming over. He's like a just a dark cloud looming over the city. It is the coolest.
He kind of like grows in size to just like sort of envelop the entire frame around this city.
There is an archangel also that is like the opposition to Mephisto, that is this like gleaming armored winged figure that is, I was just like, oh, so this is just where Brazil got that from. Cool. Like there's a lot of stuff in Brazil that takes directly from this movie, I think.
Oh, interesting.
Brazil also takes from a lot of other silent movies. It takes from Metropolis, it takes from Potemkin, like
Caligari, I think, too.
Yeah. But it's cool to see like another movie that is like, oh, that this is also one of these like core silent movies that directors have just taken from over the years. This movie kind of reminded me of some of the recent Victor Sjöström movies.
Yeah, like Phantom Carriage.
I think Murnau's kind of style is much better suited for it. I think Sjöström really excels with like kind of two people in a room having like a dramatic moment. Like he like, I think his best stuff is like pretty contained and is like just like these like intense emotional moments between people, whereas I think Murnau has so much a better handle on like these like big expansive wild like tableaus and things like that.
Yeah, well, it's like Murnau also, like, he has so much range compared to a lot of other people. You know, like the last movie I think of his that we talked about was about like a doorman who lost his job, you know.
And it's an amazing movie. It's so good.
And this one's like this one's like a big effects driven you know, medieval magic fairy tale parable thing. Yeah. And it rules. I would say the movie that I detect that shares the most DNA with is Destiny, the Fritz Lang movie.
Yeah. Also,
it feels like
a bit of, there was it the Student of Prague, I think has a bit of, I think that is like kind of indirectly based on Faust anyway.
As many things are.
Yeah. A big chunk of this movie anyway is Faust is de-aged by Mephisto. He wishes for youth, and it's the sort of thing where it's like, oh, you just gotta renounce God and sign your name in blood. It's fine. Don't worry about it. And he's like, okay.
You get a 1-day free trial.
It was like, hey, yeah, exactly, of youth. Usually kind of a red flag, signing your name in blood, but it was medieval times, so they didn't know.
Yeah. Faust was the first Faust.
Exactly. And Mephisto's like, live a little. Here, go nuts. Here's an evil flying carpet.
And oh my god, the flying carpet scene. Like it's not as I mean the Prince of Baghdad or Thief of Baghdad the flying carpet is like looks amazing, but I think that like the shot that they do kind of showing the point of view perspective of flying through the city on the magic carpet is so cool, because it's just a really long track of miniatures that the camera is flying by, like going around steeples and through mountains and everything. It's like
so cool.
It's very clearly miniatures, but it looks like so fun. It's such a fun shot.
Yeah. There's a lot of great miniature stuff in this. there's fun stuff to talk about in here. I have a lot of notes for this one for whatever reason. I know that's usually a bad sign about the movie, but I like this a lot.
Mm-hmm.
This is a pretty plotty movie. Like, a lot of things happen.
Yeah. I mean, I thought it was kind of interesting, like the details in the plot that were not in these kind of earlier, simpler, more elemental Faust adaptations. So there's this whole thing of Faust being, this bet between the angel and Mephisto about whether he can corrupt the soul of a person. And so it's kind of this, it's like a game between the archangel and the devil, on like whether you can destroy this man's psyche.
Yeah.
And then like Faust also starts off with completely good intentions. I feel like in previous simpler adaptations, it's like Faust is like, power, great.
He's a bit more selfish. Yeah. Whereas this is like, he is genuinely trying to do good in the beginning.
Yeah. Like there's a lot of destitution in his community, and he's doing what he can as an alchemist,
there's a plague. There's a plague happening. He wants to stop the plague. Pretty noble intentions.
But the thing is that Mephisto started the plague,
right?
As a way of setting the scene to corrupt Faust. By the way, you see the plague starting, in a kind of funny way, where like it's back to that shot where Mephisto is looming over the entire city, and then he unleashes the plague as just like a noxious cloud coming from below him. So it turns out that the plague is Satan's farts.
Yeah, he's crop dusting the entire city.
But anyway, Faust is trying to do what he can to help the people in the city, and then this guy comes up and is like, "Hey, I can give you unlimited power for one day. You have to sign in blood, and then we can revisit later if you want to keep that power." And so, Faust wants to do it to help people. Yeah. And then becomes corrupted by the power.
I have a note in here that I feel like is worth mentioning of when he meets Mephisto. There's some sinister cap doffing.
Some what?
Sinister cap doff, like Mephisto, like, doffs his cap in a very sinister way.
Doffing. Yeah, okay.
But
in those shots too, he has like glowing eyes, like
amazing,
like a cat or something. Yeah. It's like super cool. He becomes like, they realize that Faust's powers are driven by the devil when he can't help someone who's holding a crucifix. So then they start stoning him. He tries to kill himself because he's been disgraced, and the devil says, "Hold on now. Wouldn't you like to be a young little man who can score all the princesses?"
Yeah.
And he's like, "That sounds like a great deal. Let's do it."
But then, right as he's about to score with a princess, he's like, "Time's up. You only had one day. It was a free trial." And he's like, "Oh no, please, keep going."
You gotta pay for this WinRAR license.
Yeah, exactly. There was a lot of, especially in this early section, like the flying carpet stuff, and the sort of he flies on the flying carpet away to this like far off land. It's sort of ambiguous where it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
But it does almost feel like Murnau was just like showing off at certain points of just like, look at the amazing shit that I can do. There's some really phenomenal visuals, as if we haven't said that enough already. Faust agrees to serve Mephisto forever because he's like, "Hey, there's this princess right here, and I don't want to be old right now." But so he quickly kind of becomes unsatisfied with this kind of life of excess that he's living, and he longs for home. So he goes back to his old city and meets a sort of goody two shoes type named Gretchen. And there's this whole section where he's kind of trying to woo Gretchen, and Mephisto is like his weird wingman.
Yeah.
Because Mephisto is also like seducing Gretchen's mother at the same time.
And then like as Mephisto is being the wingman, he is also like kind of making it easier and more difficult at the same time because he's a scoundrel.
Yeah. But so this leads to I guess Gretchen's brother finds out that Faust is with her and has a sword fight. And then Mephisto sort of sneakily stabs the brother and blames it on Faust. And so the town kind of turns away, turns against Faust and chases him away. And then Valentin is the name of the brother, and his dying breath, he uses his dying breath to call his sister a harlot. Which is like, geez, dude, like what the...
Which was like, he died to try and protect her honor, and then like in front of a crowd of people, his dying breath is, you're a harlot.
Yeah. And so then, like we were just saying about how like weird old-timey ways in which society responds to pregnant women, Gretchen is like publicly shamed in the town square and gives birth to a child in wintertime, but there's no one to take care of them during the storm. And it's this really like harsh scene where she hallucinates rocking her baby to sleep, but she's actually like in the snow, and so the baby dies. And then some soldiers find her and are like, "You murdered a baby. You need to be killed."
It's really, really dramatic. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess this is medieval times, so like, it's not that uncommon. Medieval times, not the best time to live, in case you didn't know.
But the best restaurant to go to.
I've never been.
I haven't either. I want to go to medieval times.
I know. I really need to go. So, I have written down, getting canceled in medieval times is harsh.
It's a genuine witch hunt.
Yeah. So she calls out to Faust, who is sort of regretting his whole deal with the devil business, and he is sort of cursing his youth. He's like, "Oh, the delusion of youth, damn you." And so Mephisto is like, "Fine, I guess you can be old again." But so Gretchen is about to be burned at the stake, and he like, as an old man, jumps on the pyre, and they smooch as they both burn to death.
Yeah, but like she like kind of recognizes the young man who she knows.
It's like, so their love endures, and so therefore that is sort of the movie ends on that sort of like love has conquered all, and so the archangel shows up again and zaps Mephisto to be like, "I was right and you were wrong." They had a genuine thing. Mephisto.
It seems like a technicality, honestly.
Like
I feel like Mephisto like should have won that bet.
Mephisto pretty much won. Like, I think Faust was pretty well corrupted, even if he was regretful about it at the end.
Yeah.
But it ends on a nice note of an archangel zapping Mephisto.
That imagery also of like the two of them kissing like on this burning stake,
so dramatic and great.
Yeah. Wow.
And yeah, this movie does feel like we've talked a lot about how, especially like the Sostrom movies, like Phantom Carriage is like super dramatic and like super heavy, and it's trying to be really dark and serious and like all this drama. And I feel like it doesn't play well. It's like too much. It doesn't feel genuine. It feels try-hardy or whatever. Whereas for whatever reason, this movie I think balances a lot better because it has a lot of fun stuff too. It has a lot of just like the fun visuals, the sort of I think it's leaning more into a sort of like the like fairy tale reality of it. I think helps the like really dramatic stuff play better because it doesn't feel as melodramatic at that point. It's sort of justified by this, when you have a giant Mephisto devil looming over your city, gives the movie license to sort of like go really far. anywhere it wants to.
Yeah. One of the things that the devil Mephistopheles is doing in this movie is giving him a magic carpet ride to a princess and then hyping him up as a powerful prince. While all of this happens, it's very much a kind of demonic Aladdin genie.
Demonic Aladdin. Yeah, you're right.
And speaking of Aladdin, he appears as a character in the movie The Adventures of Prince Achmed.
Indeed, he does. Good transition. Because
Thank you.
There's a lot of similarities between these two movies. The Adventures of Prince Achmed, the earliest surviving animated feature film.
Not Snow White.
Correct. Yeah, this predates Snow White by 20 years? Something like that?
Like 11.
Yeah.
11 years.
But this is another Lotte Reiniger movie. We covered another one of her film, a short. Or a couple shorts, right?
Fairy tale of hers.
Yeah.
We did Cinderella.
Right.
But this movie is her taking her silhouette cutout animation style to a feature length, much kind of more grand scale.
Mm-hmm.
And this movie is beautiful.
Oh yeah. Real quick on the animated feature thing, there was an earlier one before this, before 26, or maybe around the same time, by an Argentinian animator that is lost. So that is the earliest one known, whereas this is the earliest one that exists still. Also, this movie has not just the sort of cutout animation that we're used to seeing from the earlier shorts, but it has some sort of opus-esque, painted stuff going on too, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, it's I wonder if what was going on there is paint or sand or something on a glass plate and was being stop motion animated.
Yeah, it was paint that was then being wiped off between every frame and repainted and things. It's crazy. Also, this movie is sort of smack dab in the middle of, there was a 1920s obsession with 1001 Nights Middle Eastern mythology stuff.
Right.
I don't know if that's necessarily because of Thief of Baghdad, or I think it was Thief of Baghdad was kind of part of that weird cultural thing in Europe and the United States of Aladdin stories.
Yeah, I need to learn more about 1001 Nights because I'm not sure. I mean, I just know that Aladdin is in there,
right?
Open Sesame and all of that, but I know there's a lot of other stories and they kind of intertwine with each other, as this one does with Aladdin.
Right, because Aladdin is a supporting character in this movie.
Yeah.
Even though there's also a lot of stuff that at least I associate with Aladdin in terms of, magic lamps and genies and flying carpets and...
Yeah, as with the Thief of Baghdad, this character seems like a bit of an Aladdin pastiche, but then it also includes Aladdin in it.
Yeah. Well, I guess the difference is Prince Achmed is a prince from the get-go.
Yeah.
He's sort of already a fancy lad.
A fancy lad. But yeah, there's definitely a vizier and princess situation going on.
Yeah.
In this movie, in the palace, there's a magician from Africa, who, I mean, I guess they're all kind of in Africa, but maybe lower down in Africa. Oh, well, I don't know.
South Asia, Middle East.
Yeah. I guess some of the Middle East is in Africa and some is on the other side of that little
Peninsula.
sea. But yeah, so the magician kind of promises all of these powers, and he promises them a flying horse to the king. Also,
the wizard is casting spells in this movie, and
yeah,
so the majority of the animation in this is animated cutout silhouettes.
Yeah,
I don't understand how the wizard spells were done some of the time. There's some animation in it where I'm I genuinely don't know how this was done optically,
Right.
Like what layers of things, or like, you know, using photography plus like whatever else was going on.
And there's so much like really good like articulated movement of the fingers as he's casting the spells.
Yeah.
A lot of like use of multiple planes to create depth with the silhouettes.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
Even though this isn't like what I guess we would consider traditional animation of like hand drawn or like cell animation, it is definitely the, I think, most like complex animation that we've watched up in terms of like for the show. Like
yeah. And this was the case when we compared the Disney Cinderella to the Lottie Reiniger one, is that the cell animation was so much more like simplistic and herky-jerky compared to the you know, even though it was made out of like articulated at certain joints paper cutouts, they were able, like, she was able to bring out a lot more like life and character from the movement. And I think that's still the case here too.
I feel like this animation style is much less focused on trying to emulate live action. I feel like a lot of hand-drawn animation, even now, is like, right, things exist, there's perspective, right? It's like a lot of animation is judged on like how well it can emulate live action in terms of like what the shots are and like moving camera or whatever. Whereas this is like
rubric.
Forget all of that. We're just gonna make something cool. And it kind of reminded me in that sense, like I feel like there has been a recent trend in animation away from emulating live action, which I really like.
Thanks to Spider-Man. Like direct, like Spider-Man did that. I don't know if you've seen the new one, but
yes. it is even more experimental in its animation than the first one, and it rules. It's great. Emperor's New Groove also has some kind of experimental animation, which I think was done because they didn't have a very big budget. But I was reminded watching Prince Achmed of Emperor's New Groove a bit, just in terms of like, because that movie uses flat planes a lot in terms of like not trying to set stuff. Like this movie has like a scene will play out, and it's not, if something's further away from camera, it won't necessarily be smaller. Like, am I explaining this in a compelling way? I don't know, but
okay, yeah, like it's almost like an effect of like a deep focus,
right?
But for the scenes that are being made in these cutouts.
Yeah,
is that what we were talking about?
I guess so. But the overall thing is, animation looking good as animation for its own sake and not trying to recreate photography.
I mean, great. Very specifically going for something stylistic, like her style of these cutouts, where it limits her in the types of things that she's able to depict. But she finds really interesting workarounds, and she comes up with really like interesting things that are unique to this style of animation, of these silhouettes and cutouts and that kind of thing. Like certain camera angles are a lot more locked off, and you can't show emotion as well, like facial emotion as well. But she does a lot with like emoting through movement in this movie.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about the plot at all? I feel like it's not far off from like Thief of Baghdad and Aladdin. Like there's a lot of crossover.
Yeah, it's got a lot of that same kind of DNA in it. I mean, you mentioned Emperor's New Groove visually, but like this movie, the main thing going on in this movie is kind of like a Odyssean like journey through a bunch of individual moments.
Oh, Thief and the Cobbler also, I feel like might have been influenced by this. I guess that's also sort of a lost film. At least the original version of it, but like the original animation of that feels maybe a little bit influenced by this, maybe.
I mean, beyond the aesthetic.
Like I mean, they're both pulling from the same sources for sure, but in just in terms of like the animation being like very detached from that kind of like typical like hand-drawn style.
I mean Thief and Cobbler is a really interesting reference point, because that movie is also beautiful. It's another movie that is I think the singular focus of the movie The Thief and the Cobbler is what can we do with animation
Mm-hmm.
that can potentially blow someone's mind, you
Yeah.
know? So it is the one word that I use to describe The Thief and the Cobbler is indulgent in as many ways as possible. I love that movie, but I guess another kind of interesting thing that you're talking about, that flattening, and there's a lot of like really interesting, like strange perspective flattening that happens in The Thief and the Cobbler.
Right, and that's what I'm kind of trying to explain, but it's hard to describe, I guess.
I see.
Right, it's like not trying to recreate what like your eye sees in terms of perspective, but it's more like a painting or like a
Or I mean, it's like a cubist painting in a way, where
Right.
it's showing, it's like flattening perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's every scene of this has got some really cool animation stuff. And some of it is just purely how it's like depicted as silhouette cutouts. Like there's a scene with reflections on water that is like so cool, just the way that like paper cutouts are used to show reflective surfaces. That really kind of didn't blow my mind, but I was like, that's very cool. This movie feels pretty, in terms of the plot of it, I guess it's pretty like episodic. It's like a scene of this cool thing and the scene of this cool thing.
And it's all like this, you know, he gets put on a flying horse that sends him to a faraway land called Wak Wak.
Right. Which in Thief of Baghdad, there was the islands of Wak.
Yeah.
So I think that's, you know, kind of the same, maybe pulling from the same thing there.
And yeah, it's basically a journey back home to stop the machinations of the magician.
Yeah, there's a funny scene when he goes to Wak Wak, and there's this like orgy room, and there's a bunch of women in there that go, "Stay with us, attractive stranger." But that leads to an orgy room fight because they all start fighting over him. Classic problem, you know. I'm always running into that.
I mean, and it's like something similar happens in the Odyssey, and something similar happens in Thief of Baghdad, where you know, this guy, like the kind of sirens who try and draw them in along their journey. But he meets Peri Banu, who is she's like the queen of the demons, basically.
She's a volcano witch.
Rad.
Yeah.
She's got these like swan feathers that allow her to fly, and a scene that like doesn't really paint Achmed in the greatest light, but like, you know, he sees her bathing and then basically is like, this lady's pretty, I'm gonna steal her feathers so that she can't fly away, and then I'm gonna make her my wife.
Yeah,
I guess we'll just gloss over that.
Fairy tales sometimes, you know, sometimes slightly problematic.
Welcome to discourse of 10 years ago.
Yeah.
I don't know. And it's pretty, and then a bunch of stuff happens, and then he gets back home.
Yeah. We already said, I mean, the characters are really expressive. Like, I'm very impressed by like how expressive they're able to be purely through like silhouettes. There's a lot of just like cool. There's a flying palace. There's a Hydra demon. There's an elephant tree beast. There is a great like magic fight at the end between the magician and the volcano witch.
Oh, yeah. Oh my god.
Of like shape shifting into different animals and using the like silhouettes to like the shape shifting silhouette animation stuff. That did blow my mind. That was incredible.
Super cool. And yeah, it's like a rock paper scissors battle of like, I transform into an animal, I transform into the animal that beats that animal, and then I like transform into a different animal.
That's something I want to see done in like contemporary animation or something. Like I want to see an animal shape-shifting animal fight like that now. Because this movie is German, there is a magic lamp that is referred to in the intertitles as Die Wunderlamp. Which is just a great phrase. Achmed meets Aladdin.
We find out that like while Achmed was journeying around. Like the kind of beginning of the whole Aladdin story happened while he was gone. And then he like, so Aladdin kind of recounts the entire Aladdin story in like a kind of 20-minute segment.
Yeah.
Where we just go off and like
then
learn
I think
about
it's
Aladdin.
what is it? Ahmed's sister is like also a princess, and that's who Aladdin's trying to get with.
Yeah, so yeah, right. So he's like Princess Jasmine's brother, basically.
But yeah, and then at the end they both end up with their respective princesses. And all is well. Yeah.
Good movie. Cool movie.
Very cool movie.
Watch it. It's very beautiful. It's also like a lot of color too.
A lot of cool like
tinting and toning. Let's talk about 2 movies that involve
that involve vehicles.
Let's do our little vehicle duology here.
There you go.
What do you want to start with?
I feel like let's end on the big daddy of the year.
Okay.
So let's talk about The Flying Ace.
Yeah, which for a movie called The Flying Ace,
not a lot of flying.
Not a lot of flying.
It is weirdly also kind of more railroad based than airplane based. But
yeah. They must have just like, I don't know what was going on with the name and the like poster of this movie, but they're trying to sell you like a kind of rollicking airplane adventure movie, but it's a bit more of like a detective movie.
It is, which I did not realize at all. It is also distinctly a train detective movie.
Yeah.
It is about a railroad detective, which is a thing that was real in the 20s and is wild that there was enough specifically train crime that railroads need their own detectives. I'm reading the book Killers of the Flower Moon right now.
Ooh, nice.
Which is very good. But there is one of the sort of like historical characters in that is Tom White, who is an FBI agent, and for a while he worked as a railroad detective because it was like an easy detective gig. Like, it's mostly just like paperwork crimes and things. But it's just, I think it's funny, in the olden times, like hotels had their own detectives. And these were detectives. They weren't like security guards. You know what I mean? Like a hotel detective was a profession.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
It's not even like something kind of came around to make the hotel detective obsolete. It's just like they were like, do we really need this?
Yeah, pretty much. That's funny. The Flying Ace is, I believe, the only surviving movie from Norman Studios.
So this movie is, as it's called, an all-colored cast. It's all the people in the movie are played by black actors. And like other movies that were produced with black actors for a black audience, a lot of this was in Florida, which seemed to be the kind of like central Hollywood of the black movie industry at the time.
I think we mentioned this on another episode, but there was kind of Jacksonville, Florida almost became like the United States movie hub. Like after the sort of like flight from New Jersey and sort of looking at warmer climates with like more consistent daylight, right? That was the main reason to go to Hollywood or to go to Florida, was the daylight was more consistent because you needed to shoot most stuff in daylight outside or in like a greenhouse set with a an open roof or glass roof. And there's a really good Vox.com video about Jacksonville specifically and sort of like how it was this like almost like it was like a rival to Hollywood for like a couple of years. And it almost became its own hub, but it didn't. Hollywood won out for whatever reasons.
We've linked that video before, but we'll link it again.
So Norman Studios was owned and operated by Richard Norman, who was white, as far as I can tell. But yeah, their like claim to fame, I guess, was that they had entirely black casts. I have no idea what the crews were like. And this is the only one that is watchable. Like all of the rest are lost. Which I guess of all of the ones to survive, I'm glad it's this one because this movie is very fun.
It's a fun one. Yeah.
It is. The poster says the greatest airplane thriller ever filmed, which at this point might be true, but also like there's not a lot of airplane stuff in this. It's mostly a train movie.
Yeah, he's called the Flying Ace like because most of the airplane stuff also isn't even the Flying Ace like involved in it.
Yeah.
He was a flying ace in World War One, which they called the Great War at the time because World War II had not happened yet.
Naturally.
And I almost like thought when I was watching this movie that they might have said World War One in the intertitles, and I was like, no way, there's no way.
Whoa! Why'd you call it World War One?
What's about to happen?
Yeah, he's a flying ace from the war. Historically, the U.S. Army Air Corps did not allow black pilots because olden times. There was one American who did fly with the Lafayette Escadrille in France, which is like the American league of pilots who flew in World War One before the U.S. entered the war. It's what the movie Flyboys is about.
Right. Yep.
One of the big reasons why this movie was made in the first place is it was inspired by Bessie Coleman, who is the first African-American woman and the first Native American to hold a pilot's license. Just crossing off a bunch of firsts as a person. And she was going to like work on this movie. She was going to like, I guess, not necessarily act in it, but like do the flying for it and things like that. And she died in an air accident. Like, I think a couple of weeks before shooting.
Whoa.
Yeah. Crazy. So, some historical context for this movie. Which, yeah, like you said, is for all of its advertisement as like the Flying Ace. It's an airplane movie. Most of it is about a guy on the ground solving railroad crimes.
Specifically, there was a payroll shipment for was it this train company?
I believe so, yeah.
So like someone was carrying $25,000 along the train along the rail line and waiting with the station master, and then suddenly the station master loses consciousness and the money's gone. What happened? So the railroad head honcho hears about this and then sends in the Flying Ace to investigate the situation, along with his sidekick, his Peg,
his one-legged sidekick, who has the coolest like one-legged gadget. He has like a crutch that's also a gun. Very cool. To briefly go back to the World War One thing, it is referred to in the intertitle as the World War, which I don't think I've ever seen written out like that, where it's like, there's no numeral, but it's just, the World War. One that we've had.
The World War.
Yeah. The way that the mystery of this movie is constructed is kind of interesting in that it relies a lot on like flashback. Like we see like the result of the crime, but then we kind of like flash back to see what really happened later.
Yeah.
As like the detective is figuring it out.
Yeah.
Which is a very cool way of structuring like detective movie that I don't know if we've seen before, but it's just like this is a pretty solid detective movie.
Yeah. Yeah. After I got over my disappointment at no air combat,
right. There is a big airplane chase at the end.
True. Yes.
Which there's a certain point of the movie feels like it's wrapping up and there hasn't been an airplane chase, and I'm like, hang on. Like, what's going on? There needs to be an airplane chase. And there is, thankfully. It doesn't do everything I wanted it to.
It's not shot very interestingly.
Well, also because they only had one airplane. So the two airplanes in the chase are actually the same airplane, that they're trying to look like different airplanes.
And yeah, they just show it on the ground with some wind blowing over them and a background that looks like it might be a sky.
Mm-hmm. There's like references to bootlegging, which is, very topical for when this
Yeah.
came out. Someone gets kidnapped and hid in the tail of an airplane in the like secret booze compartment. The sort of female lead named Ruth is I guess sort of involved in one of the involved with one of the criminals who is the other pilot besides the flying ace of the title. And he's sort of like teaching her how to fly in the beginning of the movie. He's like, "Oh,
like,
I'll take you up on my plane. I'll show you how to fly."
There's like an extended sequence of this is how an airplane works.
Right. Which I'm guessing is mostly for the audience.
Maybe, yeah.
What I wanted to happen that did not happen was that Ruth would like be in an airplane, the pilot would get knocked out, and she would have to fly the plane. That never happens, and that's my biggest knock against this movie. She never actually gets to fly the plane, despite being taught how in the early section.
That would happen in the Miyazaki version of this.
Yes.
Because he loves spunky girls who fly airplanes.
Yes. That is the most Miyazaki thing possible, is a spunky girl who flies an airplane. This also is like, there is a lot of, I guess, like crime plotty stuff of like the detective, the flying ace detective who works for the railroad, going around and like questioning people and like figuring out what the crime was, and like who's.
And there's some various red
involved.
herrings.
There's a couple red herrings. There's a couple boxing matches. There's the aforementioned gun crutch and like one-legged bicycle chase, where his sidekick, who's an actual amputee, is riding a bicycle with one leg and his crutch.
Yeah.
And then also using his crutch as a gun to chase after the criminals.
There's also like a really hilarious like moment where Peg just like pulls an incredibly long gun out of his pants.
Yeah.
The movie is not that funny. It's just like a plain, like detective movie. But then there's just this one moment where he is pulling out a gun and it is like 7 times longer than you expect it to be.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think there's a lot of this movie. This movie feels intentionally pretty light. Like, it's not trying to be super dramatic. It's
a fun time.
Yeah. Some stuff is funny just because of how old-timey it is. Like, when there's about to be a fist fight and someone says, "Give him the hocus pocus." Cool movie.
Yeah, there's some great. Speaking of like kind of old-timey isms, this movie, I think is unique in a lot of other like race relative to a lot of other race movies that we've seen, quote unquote, in that the dialogue is not generally, it happens a couple times, but like not, I think, in a mocking way. Like the dialogue is not written in this sort of like broken English way.
It's not nearly as, it is definitely, there's a noticeable difference in the way that the intertitles are written that feels a bit more kind of colloquial, but it is not this like super not caricatured, like really
like vernacular African American vernacular in English. Like it seems like not disrespectful like that other stuff is,
because a lot of dialogue in intertitles is written in like, there's like abbreviations and things like that. I mean, outside of this, like in Buster Keaton movies and Chaplin movies, like the dialogue is usually trying to match a certain type of spoken English anyway.
Yeah.
But and this feels like that, as opposed to this like really like uncomfortably caricatured stuff from like the what was that other production company that we watched a couple shorts from?
Was it Ebony Film?
Yes. The intertitles in that are like, yikes.
Yeah.
Whereas I don't remember being that thrown off by any of these.
Yeah, they were just kind of fun kind of regionalisms, like have a chaw of tobacco.
I also have that written down as bring up a chaw of tobacco.
And then at one point someone says, "Vamos, you varmint," which I love.
You know how people talked in the 20s. Another movie about trains that is also probably the most, well, I was going to say the most famous movie of this year, even though it didn't really come out this year, but we'll get into that. Let's talk about the general.
The General.
Buster Keaton's The General.
I was trying to link these two movies beyond trains because, like, this is The Flying Ace is a race movie, although it really doesn't involve racism
Right,
in
which
any
is
way.
a thing that I'm curious about, even like what that terminology means, because
It just means a movie with black people in it.
Right, that seems like that's how it was kind of used at the time, whereas it makes much more sense for, like, Oscar Michaud's movies are explicitly about that.
Yes.
Or at least the one that we watched.
Yeah.
Whereas it doesn't really ever come up in The Flying Ace. It's not...
Which is cool, which is good.
You could cast anyone in this movie and it would not change the script. You know what I mean? Like, it's not... that's not, like, an essential element to the narrative, I guess.
Right. And another movie that ignores the question of blackness is The General, which is starring some heroic Confederates who Buster Keaton was not even related to the Confederacy in any way. It's just that he had bought into the now popular Lost Cause myth of the kind of glory of the South, and thought it's a little too easy. It's a little too it's not going to win over people's hearts for the fallen, sad South if we are to keep the story faithful to what it originally was and have the heroes be Union soldiers.
Right. Yeah. That was definitely one of my biggest takeaways from this movie, is that it is very much glorifying the Confederacy in a way that I don't like.
It's glorifying it in an entirely apolitical, like a-racial way.
It's trying to. I mean, in as much as that can be attempted.
It's possible. Yeah.
Because it does feel like Buster Keaton did not really have... I mean, he wasn't from the South. I forget where he was born, but he grew up on trains, basically. Hence this train movie that he made. And it's like it's rare to hear him, like, talk about his own, like, politics, I guess. He seems like he was mostly... I mean, who knows? But it seemed like his reasons for sort of, like, changing the perspective of this actual historical story from the Civil War was less to do with the fact that he was, like, a big supporter of the Confederacy, and more so that it was like it let his character be the underdog, and that there was also just a very... I mean, the 1920s were a weird time, like, post Civil War, in terms of, like, the national perspective on, like, the South and the Confederacy, and, like...
Yeah, I mean, post Birth of a Nation and post Daughters of the Confederacy, trying to do this this PR campaign of perspective shifting.
So I think it's hard to, like, fully understand what the, like, American, like, general American mindset or perspective was in 1926.
And it's Jim Crow,
Right. I've read a little bit about it, but, like, I don't really feel super qualified in order to, like, fully contextualize, like, what. But it's coming out of this, like, weird post-Civil War thing where, like, the South is being kind of mythologized.
Yeah. Recast in history.
Right. And this movie is very much part of that, like, movement.
Willingly or unwillingly. Yeah.
Right.
Wittingly or unwittingly, I suppose.
Right. And so that definitely casts a certain sort of, like, cloud over this movie, for me anyway, of, like, ugh, gross.
It makes it difficult. When I heard initially that there is a Buster Keaton movie called The General about a Confederate, I thought that it was about a Confederate general and not about a train called The General.
Right, yeah.
And I was like, that's no good. That's bad. I don't like that. And then I found out that this movie is about a train engineer with a train called The General, and I said, well, that might be a little better. Like, yeah. I guess that's not so bad. And, it's not like this movie is hateful in any way. It's just that, like, it is more. It glorifies the Confederacy.
Yeah.
Like
very deliberately though. Like it isn't just about the fact that
he's not it's incidentally a Confederate.
Yeah, like, exactly. Like
the bad guys are the Union soldiers.
Yeah, and also, but like this movie has Buster Keaton waving a flag at the end.
Yeah.
So it's like it's not. I feel like this movie is not apolitical by any means.
Yeah, it's just that it's not really saying anything about the Confederacy beyond like this kind of generic like veneration of the lost cause of the South.
Yeah.
And it's not saying anything about race apart from the implications of venerating the Confederacy, which I think, this is not, it's not a hateful movie like Birth of a Nation.
Very few films are.
It's hard to compare, but it is entirely unfortunate that this movie just on Buster Keaton's whim ended up becoming a Confederate movie instead of a Union movie, because they could have just kept it that way and then it would have been all of the good stuff without any of the stink of the bad stuff.
So I believe the only time Buster Keaton ever addressed this directly, he is quoted in the Dana Stevens book Cameraman, which I've finished reading, which is very good. That the reason why he kind of shifted the perspective of this actual story, which is about Union soldiers stealing a train and just like fucking up a bunch of railroads as sabotage, was that he didn't think that audiences would accept the South as the villains. Which is
a weird thing to say.
Right, but also, like, I don't know what... Like, I wasn't alive in 1926. I don't know what it was like. Like, maybe that was a purely mercenary thing of, like, he wanted this movie to be able to play in as many theaters as possible. But maybe there really was this, like, overall cultural thing of, like, we can't like, punch down at, like, the losers of the war. Like, because there's still a lot of veterans still alive in the 20s.
Right. Yeah, and this movie also did real well in the South in a lot.
I mean, I'm sure it did,
because there were places that were giving free admission to. I think I read this, like giving free admission to Civil War veterans. So like Confederates, I should say.
Well, if you're in the South in the United States in the 20s and you're a Civil War veteran, chances are you weren't from a northern state, I'm guessing.
Well, I mean, D.W. Griffith lived in New York City, but I think he came from like Kentucky or something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway, this movie, beyond all of the Civil War stuff, unfortunate, this movie is not as funny as I thought it would be.
It's not a comedy. This is a straight action movie, I think.
Yeah, which took me a minute to realize, like, there's not a lot of jokes in this movie. There's not a lot of, like, silliness.
This isn't, because I feel like a lot of other Buster Keaton movies are, like, action comedy, right? They have a lot of cool stunts and, like, chases in them, but they're full of jokes.
I mean, I would say that his other movies are comedy first, and, like, the action is, like, this form of comedy, right? It's comedy through action, where, like, this might be what you would call today an action comedy, where it is an action movie with a couple jokes thrown in,
right?
Like the Channing Tatum movie that just came out a year ago, the one with the Lost City, then
that's
Brad Pitt.
The Lost City and Brad Pitt. Oh yeah, the movie The Lost City. Isn't that what it's called?
Is that what it's called?
That's more of a comedy first, I would say, but whatever.
Okay, yeah. Okay, it's an action movie with some jokes. It's got some jokes.
Yeah. This is one of Buster Keaton's most famous movies, for sure.
Yep.
And it's considered one of his best. I don't think it holds up as well as a lot of his other ones do. And taking away all the pro-Confederate stuff, like...
Yeah.
I think genuinely, like, the narrative... The lack of jokes and the narrative being as sort of paper thin and kind of hard to invest in as it is, I think a lot of his other features have better narrative hooks than this one and get me more emotionally invested in them.
Yeah, I would agree.
Whereas this is like, he is a train engineer. He has his sweetheart that he wants to marry, but she's like, hey, you're not fighting in the war. And so he's trying to like fight, and he's trying to like prove his masculinity to her through soldierdom.
There's an intertitle which sounds like it should be out of a 70s exploitation movie trailer, which basically says, there were two loves in his life, his engine and his woman.
But it's like, I feel like a lot of other Buster Keaton movies are this thing of like, he has to prove himself to some masculine ideal. Right. That he's like right. He's a boxer, but he doesn't want to
be baby boy.
But it's like, I feel like a lot of his other movies are about him sort of overcoming that, not through becoming the thing that everyone else wants him to be, but by proving himself on his own terms, kind of. And I think this movie doesn't really do that. I feel like he does kind of end up saving the day by being a good train engineer, but that's not what he's like celebrated for. Like at the end of the movie, he is sort of accepted by his peers, or like the people he's trying to kind of impress, for doing soldier stuff, not by being a great train guy.
But it is his knowledge of being a train guy that gets him through all of this stuff.
True.
He's like utilizing every kind of aspect of his train knowledge to sabotage the Northerners and get ahead in the train.
But chase. It's like, the end of the movie, he's like given a uniform and like medals and stuff like that. And I'm like, it's not about that. It's about like, because at the beginning of the movie, he can't get he tries to enlist and he gets turned away because like, no, you're a train engineer. We need those way more than soldiers. Like, you have training at like a skill. We need you. So I don't know, I feel like even on a bare bones like meat potatoes narrative level, this doesn't hold up as well as a lot of the other Buster Keaton films. Like, I've been watching a bunch because Blank Check is covering Buster Keaton. And so I watched a bunch that we skipped. Like, I watched Battling Butler and Seven Chances and a bunch of them. And I feel like a lot of those have a kind of stronger narrative. Especially Go West is really, really good. I feel like the thing that this movie gets remembered for, I mean, rightfully, is it's stunt stuff and it's spectacle, which it is, kind of unparalleled at this point in time.
Yeah, it had a shot in it, which at that time was the most expensive individual shot in a movie yet.
Checks out.
And it is one of the most famous shots from all of silent film. You have seen it before.
Yeah.
It is the train that is on the trestle bridge falling down as the bridge collapses in flames and smoke and chaos.
It is an actual train going over a burning bridge and the bridge collapsing halfway through and the train falling into a river. And it rules. It's
very
shot.
Cool.
It's a train crashing off a bridge into a river.
The whole movie is basically structured as one group of people in a train and another group of people in another train behind them, and then them trying to like advance on each other or lay traps for each other, or find some way to fool the other one, and that is the kind of like crescendo final trap, Home Alone style moving train trap that Johnny Silver, is that his name?
Yeah,
Johnny has laid for the Union soldiers.
Structurally, it did kind of remind me of Mad Max Fury Road because
I wrote that too. Yep.
A chase in one direction and then a chase in the opposite direction.
Yep. This is Fury Road.
Yeah. And who knows? Maybe that is where George Miller even got that structure from.
I mean, that's the thing. It's like, because this is primarily an action movie, because this is a very simple action movie in the way that Fury Road is, like pure action movie. It makes sense that this would be influential on action cinema in particular.
Yeah.
There's a reason why the special features of the Blu-ray has Tarantino being interviewed on it.
They gotta get
Tarantino, who said, Tarantino, by the way, said like, usually with movies like this, with the Civil War, like older movies where the heroes are the Confederates, I can't get past it, but this movie's so good that I can, according to old Quentin there. So this movie's like a string of set pieces, basically.
Yeah. And they're really good set pieces.
Yeah.
Some of the most incredible stunts that we've seen from Buster Keaton or anyone at this point, and so many that still hold up. I mean, that are just like another super famous stunt in this movie is him on the front of the train on the cow catcher, and there's like a block of wood on the track, and he has to throw another block of wood onto that block of wood to knock it off, and he does it with like inches to spare. And it's like, if he hadn't actually done that exactly correct, the train might have crashed and he would have died. Like, you can feel the danger. The danger is palpable just watching it. You're just like, oh my god, what? No.
And there's another like kind of dangerous stunt that he makes feel very casual, where he's sitting on that arm of the but like that connects the train wheels as it kind of moves up and down. And he's just kind of sitting there with his Buster Keaton no expression.
Another iconic Buster Keaton shot.
Yes. Yeah, that's probably the second most famous shot from this movie.
This movie is filled with like, it's like every other scene I'm just like, oh yeah, it's famous Buster Keaton thing. I've seen this so many times. Like any montage, like I feel like so many montages of just like film history in general just like pull stuff from this movie, because it's like there's so much just impressive stuff happening. It does feel like a bit of a culmination of like not just Buster Keaton's love of like train gags, but of like filmmaking's love of trains, you know? Like movies love trains. That has always been a thing, and will probably always be a thing, because it was like the second year of films ever had a big train movie, and that was like one of the most iconic, famous things ever to happen.
And then they had a great train movie.
Right, it's just like trains and film are like super intertwined, and this is one of the like canonical train films, along with what Unstoppable
and The Commuter.
The Commuter. For sure, this is one of the great train movies, and it has a lot of great train stuff. It has one of the pumpy handcart things.
Oh, I love that. I watching that, it made me make a kind of mental note that at some point in my life I want to operate one of those pumpy train cars.
Right. It seems like it would be fun. It probably wouldn't be fun.
Yeah.
It'd probably be awful, but it looks like fun.
There are so many things in life that I want to do just to have done.
Right.
And that's one of them.
Yeah. We talked a lot about the like context of this movie, which is definitely one of the more notable things about it, I guess. I guess a very notable thing about this was absolutely the most money Buster Keaton was ever given to make a movie.
And it was a bomb.
And it was a critical and financial failure. And it kind of ended Buster's run of like total creative freedom and like, just here's a bunch of money, do whatever you want. And he was like, I'm going to cash in all my chips on this train movie. And people didn't respond well to it. Like, people didn't like how there weren't jokes in it, and some people
make me laugh.
Some people kind of took offense at the sort of like him making a war movie. So the critic for Life magazine, Robert Sherwood, who was like a huge Buster Keaton fan, was always going to bat for Buster Keaton, gave this movie a negative review and said, someone should have told Buster that it is difficult to derive laughter from the sight of men being killed in battle.
Which really speaks to the recency of the Civil War.
Right. It's like a very fresh, raw thing.
Yeah.
And so I think people probably also like weren't expecting that from a Buster Keaton movie. Like, Buster Keaton made a train movie. And they're like, great, let's go. And then there's like this big battle scene at the end with like a lot of death and destruction. And they're like, no, thank you.
I mean, it wasn't what I expected otherwise, but of course, everyone considers this movie to be a classic now. got the Blade Runner treatment of nobody
Right.
liking it at the time, and then on reflection, everybody loves it.
Although
except for me.
Yeah, this is one of the few sort of like really classic, super famous silent movies that I didn't love. And
Yeah.
it is definitely like considered one of the best Buster Keaton, if not the best Buster Keaton movie. And I'm like,
disagree.
Go West is so much better. Sherlock Jr. so much better.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean this it's not bad, but it definitely didn't really wow me apart from like some of the set pieces.
Its set pieces are really great. But even that, there's the sort of like first train chase, there's the second train chase, there's a big chunk in the middle where it is just kind of like an action movie of him like behind enemy lines trying to like rescue his kidnapped woman. Betrothed? No,
not even, because she ditches him as soon as he can't
immediately gives him an ultimatum, which is
uniform.
Every Buster Keaton movie is a woman giving him an ultimatum.
Got something you're working through there, Buster?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, he is, not the most lucky man in marriage, at least in this period of time in his life. There is a kind of a good gag in this like middle section in between the two train chases, where he's hiding under a table as like the Union soldiers are like planning a battle, and he's like peeking through a hole in the tablecloth that is just like, it's not super funny, but it's like a well constructed gag, I guess.
Yeah, or if not even a gag, just like a because I don't know if it's funny, because it's more of just like an interesting like kind of filmic thing of like there's some tension being built by him being under this table the Union soldiers are sitting at, and then one of them is holding a cigar and accidentally burns a hole in the tablecloth, and you think like, oh no, they're gonna like look through the hole or notice the tablecloth burning and notice him right under the table, and so it's being used as a point of tension, and then the girl comes up later, and then you like gets recontextualized as like a way for him to observe out again, rather than this a thing that's threatening him.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's good. It's cool.
The female lead in this movie is Annabelle Lee is the character, which is maybe a reference to a sad Edgar Allan Poe poem. I'm not sure why that would be, but she's played by Marion Mack, who I don't know if she was the lead in any of the other Buster Keaton movies, but she's good in this. She gets to do a lot of action stuff, which is fun.
Yeah. They have this kind of like classic I don't know, like I'm good at trains and you're trying to help like kind of action movie situation.
Yeah.
Where like she can't like figure out how to back up the train or to not make it go too fast, and so he has to kind of compensate for the lack of knowledge of his compatriot, and there's some kind of gags that come out of that. But yeah. I guess one other quick thing that I'll say about this, which I forgot to mention when we were talking more about the Confederate stuff, is that Joe Hisaishi wrote a soundtrack to this movie.
Right, the Ghibli guy.
Yeah, famous for doing the score to many Ghibli movies, I think all of Miyazaki's movies. And his scores are beautiful. His music is beautiful. But I started watching it with his score on, and I felt like it was a little too like whimsical and earnest for a movie, and it just like made the Confederate stuff feel worse because the soundtrack was kind of like encouraging this kind of innocence and glory in a way of being Confederate. And it made it feel like this like, the character that Buster Keaton is playing is in all likelihood a horrendous person, you know. And
I mean, I don't know. He seems kind of checked out. Who's to say?
yeah, I don't know. He's in the Confederacy and he wants to be recognized by the Confederates and wants to fight for all that. I don't know. But like it made him feel like a quirky Ghibli protagonist and not like a Confederate soldier, you know? So I had to switch it over to the kind of more traditional plinky plonky piano soundtrack.
Yeah. Good old plinky plonky. There's a good episode of Drunk History about the actual story of the general, the train. John Gabris doing the narration. It's a good one. So if you've seen the general, the Buster Keaton movie, and you want to know what the actual story was like, but you also want it told in a very silly way, check that out.
And we know, if you listen to this podcast, that you like historical context presented in a silly way.
There you go.
Speaking of this podcast, it's over now.
Correct.
Thanks for listening, everybody. You can catch us next week for some of the real all-time big daddies of silent film.
Yeah.
Sunrise and Metropolis next year.
Next episode is going to be, let's call it right now, one of our best episodes.
Oh, okay. That doesn't feel like you're cursing us at all.
Well, it's like one of the all-time great movie years is 1927.
Yes.
So we're gonna have a lot to talk about.
You've seen Sunrise already and you love it. I've seen Metropolis already and I love it. You've probably seen Metropolis already too.
I've seen it a couple times.
Yeah. So that'll be a good time.
We got Wings. We got Sync Sound. We got also more racism with the jazz singer. It's gonna be a lot to cover.
Wow, yeah, I guess it's kind of the final proper silent year, huh?
I mean, in a way, I guess. I mean, we'll probably talk about this more in the coming episodes, because like silent movies don't go away, but it does, like, there is a pretty dramatic shift away from silent movies into sync sound, and that really dramatically changes how they're made also. Like,
yeah,
a lot of this like outside location stuff, the like camera movement and things like that, a lot of this like wild formal experimentation kind of goes away for a bit, because it's like, no, we got to put a camera inside of like a mini fridge to keep the sound out, and like shoot everything inside in sound stages with lights and things. Like it really significantly kind of shifts what kind of movies are made and like what they look or sound like. So yeah, we'll get into it.
If you haven't already, just check us out on Instagram and whatnot. We post stuff there sometimes. I don't know, say hi in the comments,
There you go. Yeah.
Thanks to our commenter.
Our one commenter.
So yeah, all right. Glenn, I'm glad that we're back in the swing of it after our little hiatus.
Indeed.
It's good to see you this year, and I will see you next year.
See you next year.